Yeah. Okay. Now you're
Okay,
on.
welcome everybody to the 10th episode, which is, of course, being recorded. We're going to do chapter 9, Architecture, Organization, and Responsibility. And we have videos for all of these, plus the introduction, the earlier ones, and we expect to publish an overview of all the links. So you can share them with others or revise them yourself. And remember, you're also very welcome to share the book with any friends. Right now it's freeware. There may come a time where we publish it and translate it and take money for it, but right now it's free, and I'm just very happy if you make it go viral, if you like. Publish the link on your LinkedIn website, do something interesting. Okay, so going straight then to chapter 9. And remember, after an hour, we have questions and discussions, so start preparing those questions mentally, maybe put them in chat, I don't know. But, you know, don't be shocked when we ask for questions. Okay. Um, let's see, I'm trying to get rid of help. Uh, I'm trying to get rid of hide names. Oh, okay. There we go. I'm just getting rid of windows over my windows. Okay, so we have a new way of thinking about architecture. Number one, it is extremely value oriented. Maybe top 10 values. Simple example of a value is enhanced security, and another one is enhanced usability, and another is flexibility of the employees, and on and on. But and these top 10 values are quantified and structured, detail in chapter 10, how to do that. And they drive the architect to find sufficient architecture. And evaluating if we have sufficient architecture or not is a matter of an impact estimation table as a practical tool, and that is chapter 11 in this book for detail. But so we have a whole new environment. The new environment can be described as a systems environment. We're no longer primarily concerned with IT, even though we may be building an IT system. We are absolutely going to take responsibility for looking at the entire organization, for example, the National Health Service and its culture and its customs. The architect will be a true architect, not an IT engineering architect, but a systems architect for the whole system. And so that's one thing, and a lot more things to think about, a lot more disciplines to juggle. And then the other thing is the word engineering. That's the E in SEA. And both engineering and enterprise. But engineering means, we are quantifying our values that are driving us. And we're quantifying, of course, multiple resources, budgets and deadlines. And we are also multidimensional. We are simultaneously looking at 10 values at least, and 5 or so resources, say about 15 quantified requirements for the architect. And then we're maybe looking at 10 or 20 or more architectural elements, see how good they are with respect to satisfying the top 10 values and consuming our resources, hopefully not too much. So this is the engineering environment, the multi-dimensional systems engineering environment. And this is quite different from conventional enterprise architecture. And in my view, it is necessary to take this engineering step for enterprise, for large scale, for something like NAV or health services or military. Trivial systems don't need to do this, but by trivial, I mean one man and a dog. 3 people over 2 weeks. Those are trivial. But the moment you have 100 people working for 8 years, like an Axon system in Norway, you definitely, in my opinion, I hope you begin to agree, must go the engineering route. So that results in a number of new occupations and responsibilities. And some of them require engineering. And many IT people have a background in programming, and they do not have an engineering degree. They even don't like engineering. They just want to program and think that's fun. But that's not good enough when we get to the scale and complexity of many systems, even in a very small country like Norway, not to mention a gigantic country like India, who's on the line here. So, this first page, I'm going to sort of remind you of the main ideas for the organization. Okay, and these may seem technical at first, but in fact they are organizational ideas. So the first one, value clarity, and again, chapter 10 goes into detail. How do you do this in more detail? We've shown some examples, but we haven't really taught the discipline. And so what this means is all the people involved in the project are led by, guided by, motivated by the values, which are clear. They are quantified. We can track progress towards them incrementally. In other words, a new form of agile, if you like, which does not measure incrementally the work being done. It measures the result, the value of the work being done. Okay, we don't count lines of code or user cases or epics delivered. We count the result of those things being delivered that we want. So this changes the organization. It means for example, it changes any kind of a leadership position like a product owner or coach, because the question is always, how are you doing with your value delivery? Are you sure you have got a measurable objective or requirement for everything critical? Are you really doing it the way our culture has decided to do it? And have the numbers that you set 2 years ago changed because the culture has changed, because we had COVID, that kind of. So it's a whole different questioning. So and these values can be stated at many levels, like say the National Health Service in Norway with everything, and then at another level, a project such as Axon project, one person, one record, and then for even detailed design for sub-projects within that, you can have a separate, so there can be many different levels of this value clarity, the lower ones supporting the higher ones and reaching maybe Parliament expects for the money they're investing in this, okay? Another part of the culture is, I call it selling clarity to everybody. The moment you in a meeting read a PowerPoint slide and it says vastly enhanced privacy, I'm thinking now of the Smittestop application for COVID tracing in Norway. That there should be a culture where first thing is somebody in the meeting says, what exactly does that mean? What is a vast improvement and what is privacy? And say we have a culture where we've decided that such important critical things will be excruciatingly clear. They will be quantified, for starters, and nobody will be in any doubt about the requirements for the system, and no two people will interpret the requirements differently from each other. Everybody involved, the tester as well as the architect as well as the people, subcontractors, they will interpret because it is clear and unambiguous. Okay. And the thing I'm selling here, which surprisingly seems to be new for enterprise architecture, is the idea that the requirements for the architecture, the value objectives for the architecture, need to be quantified at all times. And Geburtsphraser, also known as management bullshit, is not allowed in the culture. And the moment it pops up in an oral statement or a meeting or a slide, people have to challenge it and say, that's not the culture we decided on. I am the architect. I need clarity. I will help you formulate clear idea of how much privacy you want, because I've been trained in chapter 10 of the SEA book, but it's not actually my job to do it. It's the stakeholder who's in charge of, say, the privacy or qualities or something like that, that's supposed to be clear. But the architect needs to complain and say fuzzy inputs in objectives, which you typically find, for example, in all user stories, lots of buzzwords and mixing in the design with the requirement and only one stakeholder and one-dimensional thinking. So user stories are a very sorry case. I have special papers on what's wrong with user stories, if anybody asks me. They are possibly referenced in the back, but email me if you want to go deeper into user stories and why they are a bad input. Anyway, so our attitude as an architect is we must absolutely have crystal clear, unambiguous requirements that tell us what kind of architecture to come up with. And if we don't have them, we don't just make do and guess and push on. We push back. We announce that this is not good enough. We maybe make concrete suggestions for how to quantify it. We offer to sit down with people and help them, because not everybody's learned to do this. But so it's not really our job, but we have an opportunity to wake up management, anybody giving you requirements, and get them to be clear about what they really need from our architecture, for our architecture. Okay? Now, here's idea number 3. I'm trying to move this window elsewhere. I don't know, up there, okay. That the architecture should not be a craft where we hear the word security and we pull in some encryption because we heard that's good, or double password systems or something like that. That's a craft culture where you learn certain things to do from your great-great-grandfather and you do those things. Factual architecture means that when you pull in some architecture ideas, you as the architect are responsible for knowing or finding out which values this architecture has, all of them, all 10, the main effects and the side effects, we discussed this earlier, and which resources they consume. In other words, people, time, money, things like that, in the short term, while the system's being built, and in the long term, annual costs of people, money, time, etc. And if you, now you might, I believe that the most architects today in IT make no attempt whatsoever to figure out numerically the different quality dimensions and costs of their architecture. And I would go as far as saying, you are not qualified to be a good architect in a complex system if you cannot and will not do it. Of course, we don't know all the answers the moment we think of a type of architecture. We're going to have to research them. We're going to have to look for case studies and data on the web as a first call there. We're going to have to ask colleagues in our maybe a larger organization if they've got any data. And we're going to have to do some experiments or incremental deliveries and measure and get feedback to maybe get a final, more reliable answer. But there are systematic ways of finding out how good is your architecture in terms of values and costs. And it's our job as an architecture to do that. And now, in an ideal world, people listening to me are so mature, they just do it. The problem is the people who are hiring the architects and organizing their businesses with enterprise architects do not currently insist on doing this at all. Please tell me if you know of an environment or method which does. They basically gloss over, forget it, and do what I call craftsmanship, just following nice sounding words and hoping for the best. And this is a major reason why projects fail in the values and qualities, such as the privacy in the Smittystopp. And this is also the major reason why they cost too much and run over budget, in case you wondered, okay? The architecture itself contains the attributes that are going to be delivered. It contains the value attributes, and it contains the resource costs, okay? So the moment an architect picks some architecture, they are instantaneously responsible in this new organization I'm talking about today for finding out sooner or later, as best they can, at least rough estimates, how good is this for the security and the usability and the flexibility and the privacy and the capital costs and all that, okay? Now, the method for keeping track of this is kind of an accounting system, and that is chapter 11, the impact estimation table, which is, I've invented here in Norway, a special way of doing it. And you read chapter 11, or maybe we'll give you some online information sometime, but read chapter 11, exactly how to do it. That's a primary architecture tool. Let's see, number 4, we call it agile architecture here, okay? So, of course, everybody's doing agile, and all the large organizations are doing some architecture, but agile architecture, what's that? Well, let me define it a little bit better. It means that we are going to implement our totality of new architecture, maybe starting with an old system like the old NAV system, okay? And we're going to plug in our architecture incrementally. What does that mean? It means that we may divide our architecture first into 10 major architectural ideas, like buy a new piece of software, and then divide each one of those into about 10 subcomponents. I refer you to the chapter on decomposition that we've talked about. But this means you might have 100 elements of architecture, 10 each divided by 10, and each one of these is implementable and should give a value when implemented. So basically, our projects are going to maybe deliver every week for 100 weeks, 2 years, a chunk of architecture. And we're going to expect maybe that the security gets a little bit better and it costs us $100,000 or something like that. And we're going to measure at each step how much value we really got compared to what we expected from our architecture. And like architect Quinnen in the IBM Cleanroom method, there are papers on this in the references, if we get a bad result, it doesn't give as much security as we expected. It costs 3 times as much money or time as expected. The architect will intervene at that step and redesign, improve the architecture so that it is 3 times cheaper, they hope, and more effective in delivering security, and maybe has less side effects. In other words, the architecture will be an agile process of maybe 100 interventions at each, let's call them sprints. I prefer to call them value delivery steps, okay? And the architect will intervene and do what I've called design dynamic, meaning every step's 100 steps, design to cost, which is a well-known engineering idea. Look it up, but it's exactly what, for example, my Evo method, and which was a few lectures back here, and the IBM Cleanroom method did, that they intervene at every step, measure, maybe using leading indicators rather than lagging indicators, but they measure as best they can. They use the feedback to decide, is architectural intervention necessary? So here, in a way, you see a new organizational role for the enterprise architect. I would say it's nothing new for normal architecture of buildings. The architect is always there, even 100 years after the building is up. But the idea that organizationally that the architect is in the loop of every step, that's agile architecture. Non-agile architecture says the enterprise architecture does their architecture, spits it out, throws it at the organization, and then does another project, right? That's non-agile architecture. So we are radically changing the way things are done by integrating ideas of architecture, well tested, by the way, and ideas of agile. Yeah, and by the way, this will prove that the architecture actually works. Okay, I think we have too much architecture being thrown in, and the architect is maybe never aware that it has totally failed and is the reason for a failed project. You know, because maybe the failure happens 8 years later. Think Axon system projected 8 more years, and the architect has moved on to other organizations, other countries, other companies. And the fact that their bad architecture was the cause of the disaster where the Axon system will cost another 16 years and an extra 44 billion kroner, they don't know, they get no feedback, they never learn. They're always going to be a bad architect. So an organization should demand that architects eat their own dog food, is an American expression, and we rub their nose in their architecture step by step, and they're forced to recognize that maybe it isn't as smart as they thought it was. But that's okay. Everybody can not know all the answers in advance, especially with new technology and with complex technology. But the job is know it quickly and adjust it quickly. Dynamic design to cost. Okay, so those are the main principle. Here are 3 different levels of objectives, courtesy of Ralph Keeney. The objectives, say, in your project are there, but your project may be divided into, say, a security sub-project, and you would have things called means objectives. They support the strategic objectives of being legal, for example, I don't know, fighting. And then our project objectives will, when reached, will support fundamental objectives like good health for the Norwegian population. Again, the last week's lecture was about these levels of concern, that is, different quantified values or objectives at different levels related to each other. We need to learn to do that too. Okay, so 9.1. Now, what I'm going to suggest here are I've defined some very specific roles. If you like, you've all had defined roles like product owner, for example, and things like that. So I don't really like those roles. I think they're badly defined, badly trained, and badly carried out in a bad environment. Read my books on Value Agile, which you should find. If you don't, let me know. But forget bad Agile. Let's look at what we're doing here. So I have some suggestions for specialist roles. Okay, and let's take a look at the first one. And I'm just inventing these. So, but they become new people to recruit, people to train, people to keep up to date, and people to deal with and interface with, become new specialties. So the first one I've called value analyst, and maybe you can guess what that is, but it says here they analyze stakeholder needs, dreams and wishes, and priorities, and they select the critical things. That actually means the things we need to do, because there will be lots of things various stakeholders want to do that are, we are not going to do maybe they're too costly, maybe they're technically impossible, maybe they're just somebody else's business. So the value analyst has to figure out what is it that we need to be concerned with. Okay. By the way, there is a type of person called a business analyst, and it's really sort of the same thing, except I'm putting the word value in there because that is really the center of why all projects happen. And this is, and it's not just value for the business, it's value for the stakeholders, whereas stakeholder is perhaps Norwegian government or European Union or the GDPR law. Okay, so business is too narrow, and value, we could even call it stakeholder value analyst, might be better, but let's stay with the shorter term there. You could just call them analysts. Okay, anyway, their job, aside from analyzing these things, is to specify them as requirements. Now it says at least at the wish level. So in language, the wish level means the stakeholder desires it. But now if I desire to get to the moon and back in 5 seconds, it would be nice, wouldn't it? In fact, I want to beat Elon Musk. I want to get to Mars and back in 5 seconds. I can wish for that. And wouldn't Elon be jealous if I could do that? But so there are lots of things that can be wished for, but they are, for example, technologically impossible, or they're not cost effective, or they simply cost too much in relation to our current budgets. And so what we do is we acknowledge the wish. You know, that's the job of the value analyst, not to say we won't do that, we can't do that. Initially, I say we acknowledge you have a wish. That means this thing has value for you, the stakeholder. Whether our project is going to do it at all, ever, or this year, or in 10 years, is a subject to be discussed. And by the way, you cannot discuss the subject of whether the wish will be granted, in which case we call it a goal for the project. That means it's committed. You cannot do that until the architect has found a technology for doing it and evaluated with an impact estimation table that it's good enough to satisfy the value wishes and it's cheap enough that we can afford to do it together with all those other things we've decided to do. In other words, we cannot, a project, this is a very interesting thing that's rarely talked about. A project cannot commit to an arbitrary dream or wish from a stakeholder, however powerful, like the prime minister says, okay, the director says, the law says, okay, however powerful, unless there in fact is an architecture that is practical. And that means it satisfies the value needs and we can afford to do it together with everything else we've promised to do within the same budget. To do that requires architects to find architecture and to evaluate architecture. At some point, we can see through an impact estimation table that we can satisfy the wish, and then we could convert this wish to what we call a goal, or we could prioritize it at an earlier stage or something like that. I talk a lot about this in prioritization things in the book here and in other books such as the value planning book. Okay, so but this is we prioritize it from a stakeholder's dream to guaranteed delivery from us. Okay, so that's what value analyst does. Now, how many of you have people who are trained to do that? Most business analysts don't even think about stakeholders, but I'm glad to say more and more organizations do treat stakeholders, not just users and customers, as the entities to be analyzed. But a lot of people don't even have stakeholder in their vocabulary at all. Take a simple example. The famous Agile Manifesto talks about users and customers, but not stakeholders, okay? But then that's obsolete, it's 20 years old, isn't it? So, okay. And then what do your value analysts know about how to judge whether something is critical for a stakeholder? What do they know about being very clear about the fact that we have acknowledged your wish, but we have not decided that this is a requirement that our project will deliver in finite time? And of course, the stakeholder might say, "But I'm the director, I'm the law," and you say, "Well, you've only given us a budget for 22 billion kroner for Axon, and this thing you're asking for might cost 50 billion kroner, and frankly, we don't have the money yet. Now, if you, on the other hand, hand us an additional 50 billion kroner earmarked just for your wish, it is more probable you will get what you want. But we can't take arbitrarily small budgets of time, money, people, and grant arbitrarily large wishes, which have very expensive architecture. That's just not logical, put it that way. And the analyst needs to understand that. They need to understand their relationship to the architect, and they need to know that they need an architect that can evaluate the values from the value impacts from the architecture and the cost impacts. And they need to even understand the whole picture. It's not enough that, for example, if you have a budget of 22 billion kroner and this one wish takes 22 billion kroner, then you have no more budget for anything else. Your whole project becomes about that one wish, doesn't it? And so you have to understand that it's not just a matter that we could do it if we did nothing else. It's a matter of we have to do this concurrently or simultaneously with all the other wishes from all the other powerful stakeholders, such as European law or the government or a cancer patient or somebody like that. Got it? So question is, are you recruiting, training, and organizing people to do value analysis? I would be very surprised if anybody out there can tell me, "Tom, we do exactly that." I mean, show me, prove it. Show me the recruitment ad, the job description, the training course, the experience you have with it. I am very skeptical that any of you have organized yourself to have a true value analyst working together with a value architect. But surprise me. I like to think that people who've been listening to me for many years, of which there are in fact some on the call, have some experience with doing things like that. Okay. But I don't find this in the literature about enterprise architecture. I find words like value and words like costs, and then I start looking for the quantification, the specific examples, the methods, and I find nothing. It's just blah, 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 we should do values. And it actually is just bullshit. Okay, now here's another responsibility. I call it specification owner. And whenever we, my customers and I, or I, write a specification. So a specification in very simple terms is like an objective, a requirement, an architecture specification. That's a specification object, I call it. And it consists of specification elements or parameters. So now specification owner is quite simply a person or group that has the control over that specification. That is, they are the only ones allowed to approve a change. So this has to do with change control, okay? And so, for example, in most architectural cultures, architects jealously guard this privilege of changing the architectural specification because they're responsible. They don't want a builder to suddenly change it, but builders often try to do exactly that for reducing cost reasons or reducing time, and often don't tell anybody, and then the building falls down in the first earthquake. So in other words, for example, an architectural specification, the specification owner for any architecture should probably be the responsible architect. This could be a subcontractor. It probably shouldn't be in the long term, a named person because people come and go, but it could be chief architect, whoever that happens to be, or the architecture group. In the short term, it can be a specific person. The person is actually working that year on it. But so what we do is we literally, in the specification, write a parameter owner, and then the name of the specification owner. So what do we do? We are, in this case, this is a organizational responsibility. It's a specific role that what I often find is that when I'm looking at enterprise architecture specifications, I find that you cannot identify whoever wrote it, although it was undoubtedly some people in the bank's architecture group 3 years ago, but I don't know who they are. Their name is not on it, okay? And they're not there anymore, or they were a subcontractor. And it also doesn't say, if I want to change this, who do I talk to? Who is responsible? Can I just change it arbitrarily and not tell anybody, just rewrite it, update it? Okay, so in other words, the signal that this is operating is that in each individual architectural specification, it says owner and it designates an owner, and that owner knows that their name is on it. They know that they're responsible. People know how to communicate with them wherever they are in the world and get quality control, approval, and review processes for any change before the change is published. Got it? So how many of you are going to tell me we have architectural specification owners and we have value objective owners and things like that? Not too many. So in the same specification, this is language. So you'll find these kinds of things in the competitive engineering book, for example, which you all have a free copy of to remind you that, links in the back. It also has a parameter for the architecture. It says implementation responsible. So we designate a person or group which is going to be responsible for implementing this specification, which may be 1% of the total architecture or 10%, a major architectural component, okay? And they know that they are responsible. They are going to implement it. That means, among other things, they must have an implementation plan, which may involve contracting and subcontracting and pre-testing things and building PERT charts for the implementation, whatever. But the point is, they're responsible for getting it done in practice, for delivering that step, and for, in fact, measuring how that step goes, so we can tell the architect how that step went, so the architect can do dynamic design to cost, okay? So again, what we're doing is we're organizing ourselves, and we've got a very clear concept. Somebody or some group is specifically documented in writing in the architectural specification. And if we were talking about requirements, it would be in the requirement specification, but we're talking architecture here. Responsible for the practical implementation into the system, into all different countries in the world, or whatever that involves, okay? Okay, so new type of organizational responsibility. Then we have a concept called value designer. Okay. Now, this is maybe in a smaller organization where the only formal designer is what you call your enterprise architect. It may be the same person, okay? But by value designer, I mean, let's say you have 10 major things, major values. And let's say, for the sake of argument, one of them is security, okay? Then it might be logical to delegate the security design to a security value designer or security engineer, call them what you like. But they are trained to know a hell of a lot about security and have good networks and contacts with everybody else who's knows a lot about security. And so they're given a security goal like we will detect hackers 95% of the time within 5 seconds. And they'll figure out how to design the system so that we not only detect the hackers 95% of the time within 5 seconds, but that we can deliver it by the deadline within the cost constraints without having nasty side effects on usability and all kinds of other things. Okay, so they take primary responsibility for security, but they in fact must take secondary responsibility, as any architect must, any designer must. They must take responsibility for the side effects on the other values and all of the resources. That means they need to use an impact estimation table or something like that. Quality function deployment might be useful, but I will argue that it's not very well designed. And I'll send anybody papers on what's wrong with QFD if you're interested. Unfortunately, Norwegian universities and Kongsberg and systems engineering, I caught them teaching quality function deployment. And I wrote a special paper about what's wrong with it in 10 different dimensions. If anybody like a copy of that, just ask, or maybe you'll find it as a reference. Probably find it as a reference in chapter 11, impact estimation tables. Anyway, okay, so the idea I'm bringing up here is the idea that there are specialists for certain classes of values. Okay, now there's a corresponding idea that the architecture of, say, an airplane will have under the wing of the chief architect for the airplane, we'll have things like weight engineers and motor engineers and safety engineers and on and on and on. So this is, in other words, these are specialists who just know a lot more and can find good answers more rapidly and more securely. This is for fairly large systems. But if you're building an Axon system for 22 billion kroner over 8 years, you sure as hell need at least 10 value designers, specialists. So the question is, where are they on the Axon project? Okay, if somebody planned to recruit them and train them and make sure they know what they're doing and they're competent. So this is really engineering specialization is what it amounts to. Okay, so these designers are, that's the reason I've used the word, it said value architect, that would mean all the values, okay? But the moment I narrow in and call them designers or engineers, doesn't make a lot of difference. Designer could be fluffy and not doing engineering. So in my environment, really, I should call them a value engineer, okay? So if you want to dramatize, that means we're going to use a lot of numbers. Designer might be a little bit more fluffy and not use as many numbers. Matter of culture and size and complexity, etc. But their job is to identify all the design components, and here I mean subsets of the architecture, needed to reach a certain level of the value requirement on time, and they have the ability to research and plug into an impact estimation table all the side effects on the other values. People aren't often seen doing that at all, and all the costs, and documenting all this in the value tables. Okay, good enough. Moving to value engineering specialist. Okay, so let's just say same thing as discussed above, where this is maybe a little bit less of a proper engineer, okay, and can work on somewhat smaller projects. And the moment you use engineering, as I said, that means they know all the numbers or know how to find all the numbers and know how to deal with them and know how to measure them, okay? So I use the word engineering to signal a far more numeric culture than this culture, okay? It's amazing how many people still have a value requirement, good usability, and they say, so the design is like an Apple Watch or something like that. That's value designer. That is not value engineering. Okay. The value engineer might think that the design of the Apple Watch interface is a good idea, but they would research it with regard to its numeric properties and costs and decide whether that fits our numeric values and our quantified resources before making a decision. Whereas the value designer isn't all that bothered. If they screw it up, we'll throw it away and start again or something like that. This is, absolutely what you need for these 8-year, 22 billion kroner Axon projects in Little Norway. Okay, do we have any more? No, we don't. Okay. And gee, only 11 minutes left, but we're covering the territory here. Gosh, the rate I'm going, we need a lot more, but okay. So let me speed up a little bit. Okay. Here's the value architect. In other words, not your traditional enterprise architect, but one who is extremely conscious that the main job is to deliver a set of values and find the architecture to do it. Okay. Who may have responsibility for managing the value engineers. That's the normal thing. The architect manages the engineering specialists in any discipline. Then we have a gang called stakeholders, which I talked a lot about at the beginning of these lectures. I'm sort of threatening to write a whole book on the subject this summer, remind me. But this is when you go well beyond, and you need to do this in any large system, well beyond this oversimplified notion of user and customer. And you take into consideration European GDPR law before you screw up your entire COVID app project. Okay. So stakeholders become part of the organization. Okay, that is stakeholders in a sense are acknowledged as those who have some right to wish for certain things, but maybe also some duties to supply us with resources like money, time, people, knowledge. But they effectively become part of the players at some level here. They're people you're going to meet in meetings and telephone or email to or chat with about what you're doing with their values. Okay. A value process manager, long story short, because now I have to shorten things with 9 minutes left, is somebody who makes sure that the value stream is flowing. And that means if you have 100 steps, weekly steps for 2 years, like I mentioned, for agile delivery of value, the value manager needs to make sure that everybody is trained in the organization and synchronized so that we prioritize the highest values and the most critical values in the early steps, and we can accumulate them. And so there is a value stream emerging. And somebody needs to understand enough of that to make sure that the architects are trained to do it and everybody else is trained to do it. Okay. Here's another one, value quality control. It is not enough to have good intentions to do stuff, especially under pressure, people cut corners. So we need to do quality control of all the requirement specifications. You will normally find 100 defects per page. Read my books on the subject, okay, or ask me, using specification quality control. And from well-intentioned, well-trained people. And you need to get rid of those defects so 100 defects per page don't float directly into the architect and confuse them, okay? And so that's the first stage of value control, is quality control of the values according to some standard, like they should be unambiguous, clear, and quantified. Give you some idea. Okay, I've written lots of that, whole books called Software Inspection about that subject. Look it up. Now, here's another thing. Value policy is where the top managers, let's call this the chief technical officer decides, looking for some more text here, there probably is some under. There was. Goody. Okay. The chief technical officer decides what is our value policy. And it really is the chief technical officer's job to decide to implement the ideas I'm talking about, or to not bother and be held responsible. So, and their policy, I have, if you need a draft for a policy, let me know. I'm sure I have them floating around. They're definitely in my books like Value Planning. There's 100 policies there. But policy number 1, we will be primarily driven by approved numeric stakeholder values. Yeah? And you don't have that policy today, but I think you absolutely ought to adopt it for very large projects and very large organizations such as FHI and things like that. Let's see, People's Health Institute in Norway. 5 more minutes. Now, so here's another level of organization, that when you write contracts, you should not write contracts for doing work. That's silly. The contractor will then try to do as much work as possible forever to earn as much money as possible. You want a perfectly good example of that? Look at PwC Corporation on the Axon project, who used, was it 22 million kroner and 8 years to essentially do nothing and nothing good. So the government finally caught them at it and is complaining. And Aftenposten, the newspaper, caught them at it and said, something smells funny here. Okay. Now, if the Norwegian government had done value contracting and gone to PwC, who I'm sure is quite capable of doing this if somebody demanded it, okay, a fool and their money will soon be parted, so we mustn't be foolish. And they went to PwC and said, look, PwC, every month from now on in the next 8 years, and we'll give you a budget of 22 million kroner, which you can eat 1 million kroner at a time. We want you to organize things so that enhanced value for the Norwegian Health Service will happen incrementally every month, and we can measure it, and the health service will get better. We don't want you to spend 8 years and 22 million delivering nothing except a national scandal for your own benefit, okay? If you do not accept this contract, we will go to Sopra Steria or some other good company who already has said they will be delighted to take this value-focused contract, and then you won't have a job. Okay, so you sort of threaten them with no pay, no cure, no pay, no value, no money. But the Norwegian government isn't intelligent enough or well-trained enough to understand that they can let contracts based on value delivered, okay? It's, by the way, in contracting, it is not unknown in the whole world for decades and decades to have value-based contracting, but it's not very well known within IT enterprise architecture. However, here's a place to go and learn more about it, but value contracting means our contracts are not based on work being done. We don't care how much work you do. We will pay you for value delivered, and we'll pay you something that we agree is how much that value is worth to the Norwegian government. Doesn't that sound like an awfully good idea? Why in the world don't we do it? You know, and we can start with the Prime Minister hasn't got a clue. The Mr. Høie, the health director, hasn't got a clue. By the way, I've tried. And the health department hasn't got a clue. And the universities are certainly not advising or teaching this. So nobody knows how to do that, okay? I'll help if anybody will listen. Some of you are listening. Okay, so now, so here we're running out of time very quickly, but this implies that there are different organizational positions for managing the incremental development of value through subcontractors. okay, who don't get paid if they don't make Norway better in health services, okay? No slogans. Goodness me, and there's more, right? So let me just point out what we've here. I mean, I could obviously use another hour here, but you're going to have to read it. But here are all these things are what I call organizational and responsibility principles. So they also describe this new type of organization. Okay, and I don't have time. We have an hour, and that's what we're going to use. But you can read more about it. Okay. And the good news is that was the only thing I didn't really have any time for, except to point out it exists, and it is the last page in the book. Here's that next chapter, which we're going to figure out. Your worst case is you can read it, and your the best case is I have some videos made in other countries where we have like 4-hour courses on how to do it from British Computer Society. Just ask, I'll be happy to say. You'll probably find some information about that in the references at the end, but it depends on how updated those references are. But I will certainly supply them, and we will decide whether we want to make a Norwegian version or something like that. Okay, so that's the end of my lecture, and that's the end of my series of lectures about systems enterprise architecture. Feel free to spread it, to make it go viral, spread it to the whole world. Above all, do it, and maybe write some case studies and maybe share them with me or us. Shiraz and I talked a little bit about getting together later where we give all of you a chance to say, what did you change? What did you do after having been on this course? So you might like to collect notes about what you do. You don't have to do everything at once. You might just start by having clear value requirements. It takes about 1 day to do them properly. I'm going to do such a day with one of my multinational clients tomorrow in a 3-hour course, but we're going to do real stuff. So it doesn't take a lot of time to do it if you know how, and the instructions for how to do it is right here in this chapter. Okay, so I'm stopping and we're going over to questions and answers. And you know the drill. I'm going to get a picture of everybody that I can fit onto my screen. And drink a glass of water.
Thanks, Tom. It's been very interesting, this stuff. A lot of it, I've been on your courses several years ago, several times actually. So you know you're supposed to do this, but you don't always do it, yeah. So it's nice to get a reminder. You sort of, life happens and you get knocked off track.
Well, if you do this stuff, you can get rich and famous. You can get jobs where otherwise people don't get a job. I have friends who've gotten major consulting assignments in COVID times because in the interview they said they were using my methods. That's like UK Department of Defense. It is an edge if you're being interviewed by people who know what my methods are. The other thing is, in some organizations, you would risk getting kicked out as an alien geek with too much complexity. They just want to do it the old way, even if they fail for 8 years, right? So you got to sort of know whether you have support in your organization from like the chief technical officer, and you need to do it one step at a time and make sure it works. Don't just say, let's do it all. That's Big Bang Waterfall. I mean, be agile in changing to these practices. But I've laid them out in detail. And the only question is, where do I start this week with my real project? And I'd like to suggest again that making sure you have quantified value requirements is a very good, simple first step. Questions, anybody?
Why do you think then, after failing of year after year in different projects, why don't many enough people say we have to do things in a different way? Because many people are now, or many projects are now being run agile, but even so, they are not able to get the success or the result we want.
Now, notice if you're doing agile like Scrum or SAFe, you are not doing the agile I'm talking about. There's not one agile. There are two agiles. There's agile, which has always been a severe misunderstanding that it's incrementally delivering code, user stories, and work. That's not what I'm talking about. Those projects, of course, are doomed to fail because they're not focused on the critical value. That's what Simula did with Smittestopp in Norway. Okay, they were in a big hurry to churn out the code, and they didn't look at the value called privacy, and they totally failed. Okay, so my agile is not conventional agile, it's value agile. Okay, and I have a whole book on it. I'll send to anybody who asks for it, but maybe you'll find it in the references in the back, called Value Agile, and it's quite simple. It is not concerned with writing code and doing work. In fact, it would like to do no work whatsoever and get all the value we want by buying or applying something we already have. Okay, if you like, reusing the code rather than writing the code. Okay, so yeah, people are not doing. Again, who amongst you has been trained in this? What universities train people in it? Okay. We've only trained a limited number of people, and most people in Norway don't seem to care very much because, after all, it's only oil money, 22 billion kroner. So let's spend it and have fun. Okay. A poorer country like North Macedonia is now famous for having implemented one person, one record in health for under $1 million in 1 year, and they're a country as big as Norway. Okay, so they were so poor they had to get the job done cheap and fast and successfully. Norway is mucking about with 8-year 22 billion kroner projects, which will cost 3 times that and probably fail anyway. Okay, so there's something called being too rich for your own good. You develop very bad habits. Okay. Some of the poorest people I know are the most cost-effective for some strange reason. Okay, so we have a cultural problem, but if you ask the prime minister or the health minister, do you really want to waste so many taxpayer dollars as we move into the next election? They would say, of course not. I said, but do you realize you are doing it? You've been exposed by Aftenposten and the government about these things. And your government did it. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. I mean, the politicians we have don't have the, I don't know what it is. Maybe just they're politicians and they will never change their color. But I'd like to think we have some smart people like Camilla Stoltenberg in FHI, to mention people who, if we talked with them, they might decide to do things this way, no matter how stupid the politicians are. In other words, some really idealistic civil servants might do it. We have a lot of non-idealistic civil servants who just want to get their pension, right? But we have some identified top civil servants, and I think the people who've been talking to us about COVID all the time, like Camilla, belong to that class. They really care culturally. We know her family, so we know where it came from. You need to get some idealists who really want to do things better. And then somebody like you or my book or me has to teach them how to do it better and prove in the short term it really works week by week. So it's convincing. That's when people buy into this because I hold a slick lecture. They buy into it because it works every week and provides evidence and results. Okay, that's how you get people to adopt the whole thing, like Intel did, for example. 20,000 people over a 20-year period. Okay, but 1 year at a time, changing the culture.
Tom, I was reading a book from Google, SRE. In that they are using the approach that you mentioned in these lectures. So they said they quantify all the values. The book name was SRE, Site Reliability Engineering.
Oh,
And
I don't know about this, Yagan. So will you please put into the chat? Do we have a chat?
Yeah, we got a
yes.
chat, yeah.
Would you
So
please put it into the chat, and would you please email me so I can definitely get a hold of it? And I would, like to think that Google is smart enough to do things like this, but frankly, I don't have the case or the evidence or the book.
so it's chapter 345.
Yeah.
They have openly hosted that book, so I can send you those links. So in
Wonderful.
that they mentioned to quantify the reliability criteria. They
Yes.
mentioned how could you quantify them?
Yeah.
How would you look? How would you approach them? Also, they give sample examples of the identifiers that you could use to evaluate your reliability of the system.
Okay. Now keep in mind that quantifying availability, reliability, and maintainability is a very old, well-known engineering discipline. Okay. So somebody who was trained as an engineer got hired by Google and had to worry about reliability, availability, maintainability, and they used what they were taught at engineering school, and that is no surprise. And now a lot of people who are IT people and programmers have never learned, they don't know mean time between failure, mean time to repair, and availability percentage as concepts. So they don't do that. They just don't know. They think number of bugs is the measure of it, right? That's a typical program. Okay, now, but here's the problem. These same people, and I work with this class of people, well, for decades, the moment they hit something new like usability or security, they often did not learn how to quantify those concepts at their engineering university. So they give up. They say, I didn't learn it at university, therefore it can't be done, or I don't know how. Universities need to teach how to quantify anything. Okay. I have a booklet you'll find in the back called Quanteering, Quanteering. I wrote it this summer. That is how to quantify anything. They need to learn the general discipline of how to quantify anything, including new values that appear because of the explosion of technology and were not on the, for example, in 1960, when I was doing stuff, nobody mentioned usability. Okay. And security was hardly on the agenda. Okay. And a lot of the people who are professors were being taught as students, and they never learned stuff like that. And they never learned the general principle of how to quantify anything. I'll give you the world's shortest lesson on that. Write security and metrics in a Google browser, and you will get order of magnitude 100 million hits teaching you how to quantify anything you put the word metrics after. I kid you not, try it out. So in other words, there are millions of people who have published how to quantify anything you can imagine you are interested in, and they've put it for free on the web as academics or consultants or just bragging about their corporation. And so you don't have to invent it. You don't have to create it. We had to do that in the old days before we had a web. I had to do that. So I know how to create it from scratch. And I write about that in chapter 5 of my competitive engineering book called Scales of Measure, free download, okay? But today we have all that information on the web for anything you like. So there's no reason not to know how to quantify a value and make it clear, no matter how bad your education at NTNU was. Because I don't think it's very good in this area. I'm not impressed. I have written special papers for NTNU professors telling them what I think they ought to do, and they hardly bother to give me a reply. They just do whatever they do, and I'm not impressed by anything they do or right. With a few exceptions. There are a few, begun to know a few interesting professors there now. But maybe, yeah. But mainly they're just not teaching it, because we keep on getting these engineers who can't quantify usability, security, privacy. I have a paper called XAI. Maybe if you Google Gilbin XAI, what I found was there are 10 critical properties like transparency of artificial intelligence, and everybody's getting very interested in them. And they have 10 universities like USC and MIT have bullshitted those properties without any quantification and published it to the President of the United States. Okay, so what I did, I grabbed it and I said, here is how you quantify all these things. Again, if you don't know where to find what I'm talking about, you're interested, email me, I'll send you a copy, XAI. But it's how to quantify any characteristic of artificial intelligence that interests you, okay? And the top professors haven't even figured out they haven't done it, let alone how to do it. And that tells you how bad we are at quantifying critical characteristics of computer systems. We can't even do the transparency in artificial intelligence, which is known to be critical. Transparency means, how did the AI system make a decision throwing me out of the company or canceling my life insurance? That's pretty important stuff, okay? I can show you exactly how to do it. And I've convinced some of these top professors personally that I'm right, and they've agreed to it.
Yes, Tom. I agree with what I have learned in the science. It's you make an estimate, you perform an experiment, you validate your results, and then you learn and improve your method. So this is basic science.
Yes. And I keep on mentioning the word engineering, but the fact is, many of the methods I'm talking about are used by science, exactly as you have described, right? Hypothesis, trials, measurement, and today I call it value agile, right? Scientists don't look so much at work processes. They look at characteristics of systems like the percentage reliability of a COVID vaccine, right? And so they have a hypothesis. If I do the vaccine this way, it'll be 95%. And they try it out on a big clinical trial, and it maybe does have 95%. And then they ask permission to spread it. I just got a jab in my arm about two weeks ago. Okay, so in other words, much of what I'm teaching are basic scientific ideas and principles, but I'm not really talking to academics about scientific research. And so that's why I tend to say the word engineering. Okay, which is really these same principles in a very practical environment, like generating a vaccine. Very practical environment. But they both are founded on quantification, measurement. Anybody educated as a scientist or engineer knows what I'm talking about, but somebody who's done a computer science degree and is a programmer at heart might not know what we're talking about and might not want to do it. And they need to be replaced in large projects in Little Norway with people who can and will at least learn an engineering method. It's not so difficult. Next question.
Yeah. Just maybe following up on what Jagan said, there's a system with experimentation called popcorn flow, which is quite interesting. It's you start up with the problem observation, and then you go to options, and then possible experiments, and then you're committed to something, and then you have some ongoing experiments, and then you review them, and then you go to the next one. So it's an iterative process.
Give us the link. Number one, put it in chat. You know, I can't find chat on my screen, but it's usually around, but maybe my window's too far down. No, where's my, okay, I can't find the chat, but it's here somewhere. But I appreciate if you'd email it to me, and everybody else can get the chat, would probably love to know the link. And anybody's very welcome to contribute what they think are cool ideas for, I certainly love to pick up ideas and at least evaluate whether I think they're any good. I'll give you my personal opinion in writing on any crazy idea. There are a lot of bad ideas out there, and there are some very good ideas out there. We need to know the difference.
And Jagan also put in a link to the SRE, the site reliability engineer.
Yes, please. And Yagon's
Yeah.
going to email it to me.
Yeah,
Please.
yes,
Please.
that's in the chat. No, because I think the site reliability engineer is a very good idea, because often you have the developers and then you have the operations, and if it goes down, it's generally operations that gets blamed. But often it's the developers and the way they built the system that's the problem. So say if you start to ring the developers at 3 o'clock in the morning when the system goes down, you get a much better system.
Mm.
So to have one person that then knows about the whole thing, that can develop and deploy and manage the system in production, then you have a very big benefits, because then you get a much better system, much more streamlined system. But at the same time, it's very difficult to find those people. There's not many people that have the full.
There are a lot of
thing.
smart, open-minded young people around that can be trained to do anything, like attack the capital of the United States. So
Yeah.
I do not rely on our educational system anymore, because technology is moving so much faster than these universities can properly train professors and teach people, that we need to train people on the job. And in the long term, this will feed back as people who are working become professors and change their syllabus. But right now, we have to train people on the job to do this. This year for Norwegian projects, waiting around for the university to produce really good architectural engineers is not going to happen. Waste of time. I remind you all that number one, if you think of a question afterwards, there's my email, and those who have talked with me know that I reply instantaneously and give good answers, and you can do that next week. So happy to talk to you. If anybody wants to contribute something to me, like a cool new idea that I might not know about, especially if it is practice of these ideas somewhere, the best payment you can give me is a good new idea. Okay, that's what I'm trying to give you, and please give it back, because I don't know about everything, but I'm trying to figure it out. Oh, by the way, think about your question. We have about 9 minutes left. I'm going to tell you what I've been doing this week, and I'm going to do immediately when I close this down. I found myself working for an organization that is, in a very practical way, promoting peace in the Middle East. And we are using these methods to plan the values of a large number of religions and cultures, so they don't go to war with each other and hate each other. And that's what I'm doing with these methods as an advisory architect to an organization, a charity, which is working on peace in the Middle East. Isn't that fun? That's what I do with these ideas. Might get a Nobel Peace Prize for this one day, That's what they do with everybody who mucks about in the Middle East, even though there's no peace in the Middle East. Questions? And if there are none about the organizational things, which is our primary focus, then anything about architecture that you're beginning to wonder about?
Tom.
Yes, Tommy.
I was just wondering. I'm very interested in kind of like the first step. Like you said, you have to do it agile. You can't move the whole organization in.
Good.
Swoop. So you said that about starting, you should do quantified value requirements.
Yeah.
Would you say
I'm also suggesting this can be done in one day for the top 10, if you know how. If you don't, you might have to read chapter 10. But I do that all the time. I'm going to do it tomorrow in 3 hours with a real organization of 8,000 people. Okay. So I'm not talking about a long time. I'm talking, say, let's have a bit of fun one day. Let's really clarify the major objectives for our major project, which we clearly have not done. Okay. And let's identify the top 10 by name. That takes 1 hour. And then let's divide into teams of 2 people each on 1 or 2 objectives, and let's quantify them using scales of measure and stuff in chapter 10. I mean, what's the big deal? that's
by
a very
doing
good
that-
place to start.
Sorry. By doing that, you will also have a kind of a way to measure it afterwards. wouldn't
Yes.
you?
You now have a way of measuring how good your architecture is for the first time in one day. What a great start. But you begin to realize that we are suffering in everything, not just architecture, from lack of clear objectives and requirements for our projects everywhere. It's a worldwide problem, by the way. Okay. So just if nothing happens as a result of this course, then people start quantifying their values better. Wow, that's radical change. But it's only one day to get people to say, wow, I didn't know you could do that. Top managers are always asking me, can you really quantify this really important thing for our organization? I mean, generals talking to all the time. Okay, can you really do it? Yeah, give me 5 minutes and I'll do it. How do you do it? Chapter 10 in the book. It's right there in detail with examples. I've been doing it for about 50 years. Okay, but somebody has to want to do it. I mean, do you want to have vague bullshit objectives for your 22 billion kroner project and waste your taxpayers' money and not get a good health system so you die early? Or would you like to have clear values for health in Norway before you spend 22 billion kroner for 8 years? Okay. I approached the health minister, Mr. Høie, I have proof of this in writing, saying I would be very happy in less than a half an hour or 5 minutes to explain why your health department has bullshit goals everywhere on the web and how to clarify them. I got a nice little letter written by an assistant who said, we don't have any such problems, Tom, goodbye. And I documented they have the problems. They don't give a shit, okay? He is a nice guy, but he's got some people who think everything's okay and they don't even know what they're talking about. That's the problem. By the way, did I tell you I said I do it for free? I'm not even trying to sell a service here. I'm just trying to help poor Norway get their values straight.
Yeah, I believe it's culture. I believe
it is.
They have to invest time and actually kind of money to just change that culture. And I think that's what's the problem with lots of organizations.
You're right.
And I'm looking for a way to change mine. So
okay. I'll tell you something. Some organizations will not allow themselves to be changed in the next 10 years or your lifetime. Some organizations would love to change and they don't know about it. So one of the joys I've had as an independent worldwide consultant is the 1%, the Intels, Ericssons, Hewlett Packards, and Boeings that have been interested. They have found me and employed me to teach them. They pull, they love it, they can do it, okay? And then there's your average Norwegian government organization that couldn't give a shit. And so you're wasting your time. I mean, yes, we would save 10,000 lives in Norway if we did it, but they don't care. They're not going to do it until a powerful government figure like Robert Steen, for example, decides to get it done for their own political good. Okay. Okay. So in other words, you have to find the organizations that are ready. Let's just say they are the leading 1%. And they might not even be in Norway. You might have to take your services abroad, which I've had to do for decades. Nobody in Norway would listen, okay, except Confirm It, the one great example, but they were all engineers, okay? But all my big work with the Intel, Hewlett Packard, Ericsson, these are not Norwegian companies. It's the very select few multinational engineering companies that have been ready for this message by academic training as engineers, and because they are competing internationally furiously. That's how they got large and famous in the first place. They have a culture to pick up good ideas and do them. And Norwegians do not have such a culture at all. You can start with Innovation Norway, and well, we would like to have more innovative Norway, but a tough sell. You know, Norwegians just want to get their dinner at 4 and go skiing. And lovely country to live in. I've chosen it. But it's not world famous for the quality of what they do internationally. Possible exception of whale meat. Okay, we've reached the end. Any very last minute? I want to go and get peace in Middle East now. So you know my email, you know what to read. You know I will help you personally. I will help your organization. The Norwegian government pays me my lovely pension every month. I don't need anybody's money. I just want to help Norway and other countries get better. And hopefully you will also become an idealist and want to do the same thing. Change is done by idealists, not people looking for money. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
That's great.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and, yeah,
Thank
okay.
our arrangers and sponsors.
Thank
Also-
you.
And Shiraz has, made it happen in practice. So thank you so much, Shiraz. Really
Yeah, no
appreciate
problem.
it. And
And
we'll be back in some shape
yeah.
or form.
and anybody that has any idea for anything that we need to they want us to host or to organize something, just say yeah.
Yeah, so talk about this Google thing from Yagan in
Yeah.
India.
Yeah, I'll take that up. Yeah, I'll take that up with the other guys and see if anybody
Yeah.
we can get somebody to present on that.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye for now.